It's bad. It's getting worse by the second. Lin Dunn, I told you guys, Lin Dunn has come out and let it be known she is clearly a part of the Caitlin Clark sabotage that is permeating throughout the entire Indiana Fever organization. She has her mouthpiece saying everything she wants for her publicly. This is nasty.
Something strange has been happening around the Indiana Fever for months now, and it has nothing to do with what's actually showing up on the stat sheet. Every week there's a new headline claiming the front office is at war with Caitlin Clark, that head coach Stephanie White can't stand her franchise player, that a leaked memo or an insider source has exposed some secret plan to sabotage the most popular rookie in WNBA history. And every week, when you actually go looking for the source of these claims, you find the same thing: nothing. No memo. No document. No named executive on the record saying any of it. Just a chain of YouTube channels and social accounts quoting each other, dressing up guesswork as an exclusive, and letting the algorithm do the rest. So today we're going to do something a little different. We're not going to add another layer of speculation to the pile. We're going to lay out exactly what has actually been reported, who actually said what, and let you decide for yourself whether there's a real story here or whether this is one of the biggest manufactured controversies in recent sports media history. Let's start with the facts about the front office itself, because this is where a lot of the confusion begins. Lin Dunn is not the general manager of the Indiana Fever. She hasn't been since October of 2024. Dunn, a Hall of Fame coach who led the Fever to the 2012 WNBA championship, came out of retirement in 2022 to help rebuild the franchise and officially took over as general manager in early 2023. During her run in that seat, she oversaw 3 drafts, including the back-to-back lottery wins that brought in Aaliyah Boston in 2023 and Caitlin Clark in 2024. That part of the story is true and it's a big deal. But when the Fever restructured their front office after the 2024 season, Dunn moved into a new role as senior advisor to Fever basketball. Kelly Krauskopf, who had run the franchise for nearly 2 decades before leaving for the Indiana Pacers, came back as president of basketball and business operations. Amber Cox, who had been chief operating officer of the Dallas Wings, was brought in as the new general manager and COO. So any video that tells you Lin Dunn is currently pulling strings as the sitting GM, orchestrating a media campaign against Caitlin Clark from the front office, is already working from a false premise. She is a senior advisor. The actual decision makers are Krauskopf and Cox. Now let's talk about where the coaching change fits into this. Christy Sides, who coached Clark through a rookie season in 2024 and led the Fever to a 20-20 record and their first playoff appearance since 2016, was let go that same October. The Fever brought in Stephanie White, a former Fever player and head coach who had previously taken the Connecticut Sun to the playoffs in back-to-back seasons before being let go there as well. White's arrival was framed at the time as a move to bring in a more experienced, more tactically sound coach who could get the most out of a young, talented roster. And by most statistical measures, it worked. Under White in 2025, the Fever went 24-20, made the playoffs again, and actually upset the third-seeded Atlanta Dream in the first round without Clark on the floor for most of that stretch, because Clark was dealing with injuries that limited her to just 13 games that season. They lost in the semifinals to the eventual finalist Las Vegas Aces, but for a team playing a huge chunk of the year without its best player, that was widely seen as a strong step forward, not a disaster. So where does the White can't stand Clark narrative actually come from? This is the part that matters most, because this is where a lot of channels start blending real moments with invented context to make something dramatic out of something ordinary. Here's what's real. During a game in June of 2026, there was a visible moment on the Fever bench where White and Clark had a heated exchange, and White had rookie guard Raven Johnson sit in Clark's usual spot during a huddle. That clip went viral, and it became the anchor point for months of speculation about a fractured relationship. It's a real clip. It happened. What's not real, or at least not verified anywhere, is the leap from coach and star player had a tense sideline moment to the front office is orchestrating a sabotage campaign through sports radio personalities. Those are two very different claims, and only one of them has actual video evidence behind it. What makes this particular story unusual is that the people at the center of it didn't stay silent about the rumors. In June of 2026, after weeks of speculation about a fractured relationship, a reporter directly asked Clark to address what were described as misleading reports about issues within the Fever organization. Her response was blunt. She called it speculation. White followed up by pushing back on the framing of the questions altogether, essentially saying that treating social media chatter and anonymous online claims as legitimate reporting was itself the problem. The two of them, along with teammate Sophie Cunningham, ended that particular media session and walked out together. That's not the behavior of two people who are being forced to publicly coexist through gritted teeth while a front office secretly wants one of them gone. It's two people visibly frustrated that a real, human, occasionally tense coach-player relationship was being repackaged online as a franchise-threatening scandal. There's more evidence that cuts against the sabotage narrative if you actually follow what White has said in her own words over the course of the season, rather than cutting together isolated sound bites. In late June, after a game where Clark absorbed a hard, uncalled foul that later got upgraded on review, White didn't distance herself from her star guard or use the moment to criticize her. She did the opposite. White said she wanted officiating calls involving Clark gotten right in real time, and that she'd been consistent all season in pushing for more consistency in how her guard is officiated. That's a coach publicly advocating for her players' physical protection on the court, which is a strange thing to do if the working theory is that she secretly resents her. Basketball writers who cover the team closely, including columnists who've spent time inside Fever practices and locker rooms this season, have described the entire reality distortion field phenomenon by name. No matter what the Fever actually do on the floor, a parallel online narrative of dysfunction persists almost completely detached from the results and the access-based reporting. So if there's no leaked memo, no documented sabotage plot, and the two people supposedly locked in conflict have both denied it on the record, why does this story keep getting made? A few reasons, and they're worth understanding because they explain a huge amount of what you see across sports content right now. Caitlin Clark is, by a wide margin, the most searched, most discussed player in the WNBA, and arguably in women's sports globally. Content built around her, especially anything that implies conflict, controversy, or betrayal, tends to outperform straightforward game recaps by a massive margin. That creates a financial incentive for channels to manufacture or exaggerate tension, because a calm, functional locker room doesn't generate views the way a supposed civil war does. Layer onto that the fact that Clark's rise has made the Fever a lightning rod in broader arguments about how women's sports are covered, marketed, and officiated, and you get a perfect storm where any ambiguous moment, a tense huddle exchange, a coach's post-game tone, a front office personnel change from over a year ago, gets reinterpreted as proof of a larger conspiracy. None of this means the Fever's season has been drama-free or that every question about the team is illegitimate. Real tension exists in almost every professional locker room, and a competitive, driven rookie adjusting to a demanding, veteran head coach is a completely normal storyline that doesn't require inventing a memo to be interesting. Clark is one of the most competitive players in the sport. White is a coach with high standards who has openly talked about the psycho level of competitive fire she saw in Clark as a compliment, not a complaint, and their working relationship, like most real relationships between demanding people trying to win, is going to have visible friction sometimes. That's a legitimate story. It's just not the story that gets you a thumbnail with the words panic and sabotage in all caps. What should actually worry Fever fans, if anything, isn't a fabricated leak memo. It's the way this cycle of manufactured controversy can genuinely affect a young team trying to build chemistry under a national spotlight. Every time players and coaches have to spend part of a post-game press conference knocking down rumors instead of talking about the game they just played, that's a real cost, even if the rumors themselves are fake. Every time a front office that's actually invested significant resources into building a contender around its two lottery picks gets painted as secretly working against its own star, that's reputational damage built on nothing. The people actually running this organization, Amber Cox and Kelly Krauskopf, have spent the better part of 2 years reshaping the roster, adding pieces around Clark in Boston, and building out a coaching staff specifically pitched around maximizing that young core. That's the opposite of a front office trying to sabotage its franchise player. So here's the actual question worth asking, instead of the manufactured one. Not is the front office secretly trying to run Caitlin Clark out of Indiana, because there's no credible evidence that's true. The real question is whether the WNBA media ecosystem around its biggest star has become so incentivized toward conflict that it will keep inventing crises regardless of what the people actually involved say or do. Clark and White have addressed this directly. The record of White's public comments this season leans toward protection and advocacy for her star guard, not resentment. The front office has spent real resources building around both of its stars rather than tearing the roster down. If you're looking for the villain in this story, it might not be inside the Fever's locker room at all. It's worth zooming out for a second and looking at how this compares to other franchises that have gone through similar star and coach growing pains, because context matters here. Every time a young superstar arrives at a franchise that hasn't won much recently, there's an adjustment period between that player's instincts and the coaching staff system. That's true across every professional sport, not just the WNBA. The difference with Clark is the sheer size of the audience watching every second of that adjustment period play out in real time, which means a completely normal coaching disagreement, the kind that happens in practically every NBA and WNBA locker room every single season, gets treated as a 5-alarm fire because millions of people are watching a single clip out of context instead of the full season of practices, shoot-arounds, and film sessions that never make it onto anyone's timeline. A coach benching a player from a specific spot in a huddle for one possession is the kind of small in-game coaching decision that happens constantly and is almost never remembered by the following week, unless the player involved happens to be the most famous athlete in the sport. It's also worth pointing out how the insider claims in these videos tend to work, because understanding the mechanism helps explain why they spread the way they do. A host will say they've talked to people inside the organization, without naming who those people are, what their actual role is, or providing any way to verify the claim. That's not a knock on every anonymous source in sports journalism. Plenty of real reporting relies on unnamed sources with legitimate access. But there's a meaningful difference between an established beat reporter with a track record of accurate, verifiable scoops citing an anonymous source, and a commentary channel with no beat access making a sweeping organizational claim that conveniently can't be checked. When you strip away the dramatic music and the confident delivery, what you're often left with is an opinion dressed up as a scoop. That doesn't mean everything said on those channels is automatically false. It means it hasn't been verified, and treating it as confirmed fact is exactly how misinformation about real people spreads. There's also a business angle to the Fever's situation that rarely gets mentioned in these controversy videos, and it actually undercuts the sabotage theory pretty directly. Clark's presence has been transformative for this franchise financially. Attendance, merchandise sales, and national television ratings for Fever games have all seen historic jumps since her arrival, numbers that any front office executive would recognize as franchise-altering. It would be an extraordinarily strange business decision for Cox, Krauskopf, or anyone else in that building to actively work against the single biggest driver of revenue and attention the organization has ever had. Front offices in professional sports are not immune to internal disagreements or ego, but the financial incentives here overwhelmingly point toward protecting and building around Clark, not undermining her. That's not a moral argument, it's just basic organizational self-interest, and it's one more reason the sabotage framing doesn't hold up well once you look at the actual incentives at play. None of this is to say fans shouldn't ask hard questions about how the Fever are being run. Those are fair and important conversations. Is the offense being built to maximize what Clark does best as a passer and shooter? Is the roster construction actually good enough around her in Boston to compete for a title in the next couple of seasons? Is the coaching staff getting the most out of a very young core still learning to play together at an elite level? Those are legitimate basketball questions that deserve real analysis, and reasonable people can disagree on the answers based on what's actually happening on the court. What doesn't hold up is skipping past all of that nuance and jumping straight to a claim of coordinated sabotage, backed by nothing more than a vague reference to unnamed insiders and a single 10 sideline clip stripped of its context. So where does that leave us? The documented, verifiable version of this story is this: Lin Dunn stepped back from the GM role over a year and a half ago and is no longer running Fever basketball operations. Amber Cox and Kelly Krauskopf are the ones actually making front office decisions, and their track record this offseason and this year has been building around Clark in Boston, not against them. Stephanie White replaced Christy Sides, led the team to a winning record and a playoff upset in her first season largely without her best player available, and has been on the record multiple times this year specifically advocating for Clark, including pushing officials to protect her more consistently on the court. There was one real, viral moment of on-court tension between White and Clark in June, and both of them, along with a teammate, directly and publicly rejected the idea that it reflected some deeper organizational rift. That's the whole verified record. Everything past that point, the leaked memo, the decade-long media pipeline, the claim that front office executives are quietly rooting against their franchise player, is speculation dressed up as reporting. What do you think is actually driving this narrative? Genuine friction that just hasn't fully surfaced yet, or a content ecosystem that has figured out that manufacturing conflict around the WNBA's biggest star is simply good business? Drop your take in the comments, and if you want more breakdowns that separate what's actually been reported from what's just noise, make sure you're subscribed, because this is not going to be the last time this exact story tries to come back around.